All right, let's dive into the world of Native American cultures. Well, we're going to try to go beyond the usual stereotypes, really try to understand the diversity of all these amazing cultures.
Yeah, it's so easy to lump everyone together as just Indians, like it's all one big group, right? I mean, North America had so many distinct cultures, each one with its own unique story.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing when you think about how spread out they were and dealing with such different environments.
Exactly. I mean, surviving on the Great Plains is totally different from the Northwest coast. Or think about the Arctic, ice and snow everywhere. Each
Hmm.
environment demanded different ways of life. Well, one thing that really stood out was the role of women. Did you know many Native American societies were matriarchal?
Wait, really? That's not what we usually hear?
Right. It really challenges our assumptions. Think about it. In a lot of tribes, men were often away from the community, hunting, trading, gone for long periods. So women naturally took on these really important roles.
That makes a lot of sense. So they weren't just like taking care of things back home, they were actually running things.
Exactly. They had authority, made decisions about resources. They even had a say in choosing leaders.
Wow, that's incredible. It really changes how we think about history.
hmm
Okay, so we've got diverse environments, powerful women. What else should we know about these cultures?
Well, the documentary also gets into their spiritual beliefs, how deeply connected they were to nature.
I've always been fascinated by that great dream concept, this idea that we're all born with a spiritual blueprint.
Yeah, it's such a powerful idea. Like you're carrying this wisdom inside you from the very beginning. And dreams and visions were seen as messages from the spirit world.
And of course, there's the shaman. The documentary talks about some pretty intense healing practices.
Oh, yeah, definitely some stuff that seems strange to us now. But we have to remember, they believed illness was a spiritual imbalance.
So the shaman wasn't just treating symptoms, they were trying to restore harmony.
Exactly. They believed in the connection between the physical and spiritual.
It's a completely different way of thinking about medicine. Okay, so strong women, unique spiritual views, connection to nature. What else made these cultures so interesting?
Well, let's talk about the bison. I mean, this animal was central to life for the Plains Indians. It was like their everything: food, clothing, tools, even fuel.
Yeah, they
They-
used every single part of the animal. It's amazing how resourceful they were. Did you know that before horses, hunting bison was completely different?
Oh, yeah, it was so much harder. Imagine tracking these huge animals on foot. They had to use all sorts of tricks, disguises, even driving them off cliffs.
Wow, that takes serious skill and planning. And then horses came along and changed everything.
Totally. Horses revolutionized their lives. They became amazing horsemen, could hunt more efficiently, travel further, control more territory.
It wasn't just about speed either, right? It was about power, prestige, freedom.
Exactly. The horse was more than just an animal to them.
Speaking of which, the documentary mentions blood law, which is a different concept of war than we have today.
Yeah, it wasn't about conquering land or getting rich. It was about balance, restoring honor. Like, if someone from another tribe killed a member of yours, you had to seek revenge, not just for the person, but for your whole clan.
So it was about restoring balance through retribution.
Right, and that idea of balance extended to their treatment of animals, too. Even in warfare, they respected the spirits of the animals they killed.
It's a very different perspective.
Yeah.
That respect for life also extended to how they raised children, right?
Oh, yeah. They believed in teaching through observation. Children learned by watching and imitating adults.
So no punishments or rewards.
No, they were guided and mentored.
That's fascinating. So we've got powerful women, spiritual bison, unique parenting. It's clear these cultures were far more complex than we usually think.
Absolutely. And we've only scratched the surface here. The documentary covers so much more, from the Great Plains to Alaska.
Well, I'm ready to keep going. Let's dive into some more specific examples. How these cultures adapted to their environments and developed their unique ways of life.
When you think about adaptation, the Alaskan natives really stand out. I mean, their environment was so different from, say, the Great Plains.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a whole different world up there. Ice, snow, freezing water. How did they survive in that?
Well, they couldn't depend on bison herds like the Plains Indians. Their survival was all about the ocean. They were amazing at fishing, hunting seals and whales and walrus.
Right. The documentary shows some of their tools. They're incredible.
Yeah, like those harpoons with the detachable heads for hunting those big marine mammals. And their kayaks, made from driftwood and animal skins. Perfectly designed for this icy water.
It's amazing what they could do with limited resources. I mean, they even made clothes out of seal intestines.
Talk about resourceful, right? They couldn't waste anything in that environment. And speaking of resourcefulness, have you heard of the potlatch?
Oh, yeah, that was fascinating. It's more than just a party, isn't it?
So much more. It's this huge social gathering where the host basically gives away tons of their stuff, blankets, food, tools, even copper shields.
Wait, so they're gaining status by giving stuff away. That's the opposite of how we think today.
I know, right? But for them, generosity meant wealth and power. The more you gave away, the more respect you earned.
So it wasn't just showing off.
Not at all. It also had this important economic function, redistributing wealth, making sure everyone had what they needed.
Like a built-in safety net for the whole community.
Exactly. It shows how much they valued community and sharing.
Okay, so we've got adaptable Alaskans, generous potlatchers. Seems like resourcefulness and community are big themes here.
Yeah.
But the documentary also talks about some darker parts of their history, right?
It does, yeah. And one of the most interesting examples is the fur trade. It really shows how Native American and European cultures clashed and how things can go wrong even when they start out okay.
I remember the documentary explaining how some tribes did well at first. They
Ah.
became these powerful middlemen in the fur trade.
Right, they knew the land, they were skilled hunters, and they already had trade networks set up, so they were perfect partners for the Europeans who wanted those furs.
But it didn't stay that way for long, did it?
No, unfortunately not. The demand for furs just kept growing and put a lot of pressure on the animal populations. And then the European traders got greedy. They started turning tribes against each other.
Oh, wow. So they used the fur trade to create conflict.
Yeah, it's that classic divide and conquer strategy. They'd give weapons and alcohol to certain tribes, and that made it easier to control them and exploit them.
And that led to some serious problems, right?
Absolutely. Intertribal conflicts got worse. Traditional ways of life were disrupted. Alcoholism became a huge issue. It's just tragic, you know? Even when things seemed good at first, European contact often had terrible long-term effects.
It reminds us that history isn't simple. There are no easy answers. It's all very complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And that complexity is really clear when we look at European diseases. It shows how even unintentional actions can be devastating.
Yeah, the documentary highlights the impact of smallpox and measles. Native populations had no immunity. Whole communities were wiped out.
It's heartbreaking. Imagine losing so many people to these invisible enemies. No wonder they saw it as a sign of spiritual imbalance.
It must have been terrifying and completely destabilizing.
It was, and it made them even more vulnerable to exploitation. As the colonists moved westward wanting land and resources.
The documentary doesn't hold back on showing the brutality of that expansion.
No, it shows how Native Americans were forced off their land, often through violence, broken promises, treaties ignored. The story of the Sioux and the Black Hills Gold Rush is a good example.
Right, the Black Hills were sacred to the Sioux. But then gold was discovered, and white settlers flooded in. And eventually the Sioux lost their land.
Exactly. Economic interests won out over Native American rights. And that same pattern happened over and over again.
It's a dark part of American history, and it still affects people today.
Absolutely. The legacy of that forced removal, assimilation policies, it's still felt in many Native American communities.
But the documentary also shows their resilience, their resistance.
Yes, definitely. The ghost dance movement is a perfect example. Even though it ended tragically, it shows their strength, their refusal to give up.
The film explains how the ghost dance emerged in the late 1800s. It was this spiritual movement promising the return of the buffalo, the resurrection of loved ones, a return to their old way of life.
It was a message of hope in a time of despair.
And it spread so quickly, uniting tribes across the West.
But that popularity scared the white authorities. They saw it as a threat to their power.
And that fear led to the massacre at Wounded Knee.
Yes, in December 1890, U.S. troops opened fire on a group of Lakota Sioux. Hundreds were killed, mostly women and children.
Senseless act of violence trying to crush their spirit, their hope.
It was a tragedy, a turning point in their history. But it didn't completely break them.
The documentary ends on a hopeful note, showing how Native American communities are revitalizing their cultures.
It's inspiring to see their resilience, their determination to preserve their traditions, their languages, their connection to the land.
They've been through so much, but they haven't given up.
Exactly. And you know, one thing that struck me in the documentary was how important oral tradition is to them.
Oh yeah, their storytelling. It's amazing. It's like a way to keep history alive, pass down knowledge.
Exactly. Imagine sitting around a fire, listening to the elders share stories. Stories passed down for generations.
Like a living library, a tapestry of knowledge.
And they weren't just stories about the past. They taught moral lessons, shared cultural values, helped create a sense of identity and belonging.
They were making sense of the world, connecting to something bigger.
Passing down wisdom to the next generation. And that connection extended to nature, too. Their respect for the natural world was so deep.
Yeah, the documentary shows how they saw themselves as part of nature, not separate from it. They understood that everything is connected.
Right, and their hunting practices reflected that respect. They
Dang.
took only what they needed and they gave thanks. They understood the balance of the ecosystem.
That's something we could learn from today. We've become so disconnected from nature, and it's causing
I
problems.
agree. We need to rediscover that connection, that understanding that we depend on a healthy planet.
We need to find that balance again.
Mhm.
Honor the wisdom of indigenous cultures, protect nature for the future.
Well said. Speaking of wisdom, I was really fascinated by the documentary's look at Native American symbolism.
Oh yeah, the symbols are so intricate, so meaningful, like a whole visual language.
Exactly. And that was important because many cultures didn't have writing, so they used symbols to record history, express ideas, decorate everything: clothing, weapons, totem poles.
Those totem poles are incredible, so
Right.
huge and detailed.
But they're more than just art. Each figure represents an ancestor, a clan, a story, like a family history carved into wood.
Wow, so much meaning packed into these huge structures.
Like visual storybooks, preserving their heritage,
It reminds us that there are so many ways to communicate.
to express ourselves, to share our stories. And speaking of communication, the documentary also talks about their long-distance communication.
Right. Smoke signals and that universal sign language. They could communicate across huge distances.
Pretty incredible how they use the elements, their own bodies, to send
It's
messages.
like their own version of the internet.
Exactly. It shows their ingenuity, their understanding of their environment.
And it shows how important communication is, not just for practical things, but for relationships, for sharing knowledge, for building community.
Speaking of community, the documentary also explores the shaman's role.
The shaman, they were like the spiritual leaders, the healers,
Exactly. They held a really unique position in the tribe.
and some of their healing practices were pretty intense.
They were, but to understand them, we have to try to see the world through their eyes. They saw illness as a spiritual imbalance, not just a physical problem.
So the shaman was trying to restore harmony.
Exactly. Connecting the physical and spiritual realms. And their techniques, even though they might seem strange to us, were all about releasing negative energy, restoring balance.
It's such a different way of thinking about health.
It is, and it shows how interconnected they saw everything. Everything has a spirit, and balance is key to well-being.
It's a good reminder that there are many ways to heal.
Many ways to understand life, many truths beyond our own culture.
Well said. And speaking of different perspectives,
The documentary also takes us to the Iroquois Confederacy.
oh yeah, the Iroquois Confederacy, they were a powerful group.
They were, imagine, 5, later 6 different nations
Mhm.
coming together like that. It was a sophisticated system.
I remember the documentary talking about their Grand Council with
Mhm.
representatives from each nation. And women had a big role in choosing those representatives.
That's right. Women had real power in Iroquois society. They were involved in decisions, they controlled property, they were essential for keeping the peace.
It's amazing that they created such a complex system.
It is, and their strength was a real challenge to the colonists. Some people even think they influenced the U.S. Constitution.
Wow, that's incredible. It shows how much we can learn from indigenous cultures.
Absolutely. And their story shows that even when things are difficult, you can find strength in unity, resist oppression, hold on to your identity.
That's a powerful message for us today, don't you think?
I agree, the Iroquois Confederacy shows what's possible. Collaboration, respect for different views, the strength of the human spirit.
Yeah, it's really impressive how they held it all together for so long, even with all the pressure from European colonists.
Yeah, they were really resilient. And they understood how to work together, build consensus. This deep dive has been so interesting. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about Native American history, but about humanity in general.
Me too. It really makes you think about things differently, question your own assumptions, appreciate different ways of life. But it's not just about the past, right? These cultures are still alive, still facing challenges.
Oh, absolutely. That's so important to remember. Native American communities are still dealing with the effects of colonialism, poverty, discrimination, loss of land, and resources.
So as we wrap up here, what can our listeners do to engage with these cultures in a way that's meaningful and respectful?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to get information from reliable sources, books, documentaries, websites created by Native Americans themselves.
So not just mainstream media, which can be biased.
Exactly. A lot of tribes have their own websites, cultural centers. where you can learn directly from them.
It's about hearing their stories in their own words.
Right, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Have respectful conversations, be open to learning new things.
What about supporting Native American artists and businesses?
Oh, that's a great way to show support. There are so many talented artists, musicians, writers, entrepreneurs. By supporting them, you're helping them economically, and you're helping to preserve their cultural heritage.
Makes sense. Are there any organizations we can support
Yeah,
that are helping Native American communities?
definitely. There are groups working on land rights, language revitalization, education, social justice.
So do some research, find an organization that speaks to you.
Donate your time or money, even just spreading awareness helps.
Talk about these issues, challenge stereotypes, amplify Native voices.
It's about being an ally, using your voice to support them.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're all connected.
We might have different backgrounds, different beliefs, but we're all human.
We can learn from each other, respect each other's cultures, work together to build a better world.
I love that. A better world for everyone.
Well, this has been an incredible journey. We've learned so much about Native American cultures, their history, their resilience, their unique ways of life.
I hope our listeners feel the same way. This is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep engaging with these amazing cultures. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.